Hi, and welcome to the webinar. My name is Brian Hoekelman, VP of Product and Business Development at OTAVA. Thanks for participating. This is the first step in a series of webinars OTAVA will be hosting regarding Azure. Today we'll be covering how to accelerate innovation with Azure, and the second part will be focused on the security and compliance elements in the Azure framework, and then we'll be moving on to business intelligence, insights, and data management, and finally wrapping it up with generative AI on the Azure platform. There's a big focus on the Secure Azure Cloud, how we benefit you in terms of adopting cloud, driving innovation, and deploying in a secure framework. So let's kind of jump into it. Just a quick overview of OTAVA. Obviously, we are a secure and compliant multi-cloud provider. We have a variety of different cloud solutions. We're going to be focused on Azure for this series. And then in terms of our differentiation, we obviously are a people-driven organization and have a huge amount of expertise and resources in these categories. Let me start off by introducing the panel today. My name is Brian Hoekelman. I'm VP of Product and Business Development. I'll be facilitating today's conversation. And I will be talking with a couple other colleagues here at OTAVA. I'll introduce them, but I'll let them kind of jump in as well and talk a little bit about their background. Jason Pohlman and Boughton. Jason, why don't you take it off and give us a little background on your area of expertise?
Sure. Thank you, Brian. I've been in the field for over 20 years now. I come from the likes of Dell, EMC, HP, and been on OTAVA now for 8 years, and now field CTO for a public cloud practice. Solutions architect with Azure, and recently just acquired my Azure Virtual Desktop certification as well. So building out our practice here at OTAVA. Bobby, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Jason. My name is Boughton. I have about 20 years of experience also in all things managed hosting, everything from co-location, private cloud, and all the major large-scale cloud providers as well. One of the key things that I've concentrated on is really on cybersecurity within those practices. So pleasure to be here. I also have my Azure Fundamentals certification, so I can add some color into this conversation.
Awesome. So thanks, guys. Look forward to a dynamic discussion today. Let's jump into the agenda and what we're going to be covering. Again, we're going to talk a little bit about Azure Cloud as a catalyst to innovation. And so, in today's world, how are we looking at cloud not just to offload certain workloads, but to accelerate innovation and business outcomes? We want to keep pace with security in the cloud, so we'll talk about protecting those workloads. We'll jump into some real-world case studies that Jason's facilitated for us. And then how do you plan, prepare, and deploy and drive the outcomes that you're looking for? And then, have any questions or discuss any kind of next steps that we have in the discussion today. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So first off, in terms of the journey and benefits of cloud, and in particular Azure, and I find this to be a really great slide, because I think the discussion has changed. If we would have had this webinar, 5 or 7 years ago, we'd talk about, how you need to adopt cloud and, what the procedural elements of that. But we're quickly changing into, how cloud drives competitive differentiation and innovation. So obviously there's the best practices around optimization and platforming and protecting the environments that you're deploying. But the conversation is changing in the boardroom and changing in terms of the outcomes that prospects and clients are trying to drive. Bobby, you've been in this business for a long time. Why don't you talk a little bit about how we've evolved from, hey, I'm going to deploy test dev and do some early code releases in public cloud, to where we are and what we're trying to drive today.
Yeah, the conversations that I've been having, mainly with folks that are making decisions about adopting cloud today, really revolves around how can they develop new products, new solutions, and have the ability to roll those out very quickly and use as much automation as possible in order to be able to do that. And Azure, has the capability of bringing to bear a variety of different tools that haven't been around for that long a period of time. With the revolution of AI coming into play, everybody's talking about AI, and not only for analysis purposes of data, but really how they can use AI to develop their new applications, new products and services for their customers. I think that's where things are really, moving forward in that direction at a really fast pace. Of course, cost optimization, security, making sure environments are resilient and have the ability to scale. Those are always subjects that we talk about, but I think AI is driving a whole different conversation of speed to market.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because you can't really do a press release or look at a quarterly announcement without seeing the words AI, but it's a process. There's a journey. You don't get from here to there overnight. And so let's talk a little bit about some of those components: modernization, automation, data management, as you go through this journey. So first, let's talk about that automation and modernization of those applications. So, Jason, you spent a ton of time, working with some early adopters, from the OTAVA perspective on Azure and deploying and modernizing workloads. Give us a little perspective on, what clients are trying to accomplish and what tools they're adopting and how they're thinking about, lift and shift, and is that changing in today's modern cloud, deployment architecture?
Yeah, I think it is. And I just saw a recent stat from IDC that said that back in 21, about 50% of businesses that were surveyed said that they were going to re-platform their application within the next 12 to 24 months. In the next year, it was up to 68% said that they were planned on replatforming, because the adoption of cloud is making that feasible and achievable now. And what I mean by that is there was a misconception, almost a barrier to entry to the cloud to modernize your application, where decoupling these tightly coupled applications has been kind of reformatted over the last years, making it easier and giving a pathway to actually modernize not only your applications, but all of or certain business applications, but all your applications. So we're seeing adoption for modernization, not necessarily on the IaaS, but also on the data and the data science side of the house now. And a lot of companies are taking that and saying, okay, we can modernize it now. How can we introduce cost optimization strategies with it as well? And that first stat kind of gives a 3-year return on investment of cloud adoption compared to the cost of CapEx of having an on-prem workload.
Excellent. So give me a sense for, like, what are the tools? So I've got a half dozen workloads on-prem today. I'm trying to get out of the CapEx business has always been kind of one of the core tenets and value props of adopting cloud. But what are some of the tools that I'm adopting? Because lift and shift didn't really work. I mean, there was refactoring that need to happen. What are some of the modern tools that are available with Azure and cloud in general that allow you to make that migration a little bit more frictionless?
So modernizing applications with modern native tool sets, Azure does make it easy. The first thing is, before anything starts, is of course planning, and we're going to get into the planning stages here in just a minute. We talk about a framework that we need to follow. It enables us that agility that we're looking for once we get workloads out in Azure. The first step is using a tool that's been a proven tool for migrating data, and that is Azure Migrate. Not only can you migrate your data, but it also gives insights into, okay, what series of VM you're going to use. There's a SQL migration utility for it as well, and what you can use out in Azure for hosting your data, if it's SQL native, if it's SQL managed instance or if it's SQL running on a VM. So there's different tools. And once you start investigating the data and the workload, you get to a sense to understand what tools you can use out in Azure because they give you options, especially when it comes to Microsoft SQL, they give you options. And then from there, you can start to understand your cost optimization strategies. So some of the tools that I just mentioned, Azure Migrate, the SQL hosting your data out there, and then you get into a tool that is commonly known to get business intelligence in Power BI and have a whole suite of tools. And even now, Copilot for Power BI. Everything is Copilot now, right? So a lot of tools that you can use not only to get your data out there, to host your data out there, to bring cost optimization strategies out there, but also to drive business intelligence from your data as well. So I gave you a few of the tools, Brian. Is there any other areas you'd like me to touch on?
No, that's awesome. I think the point is, we've really come a long ways in the past probably decade, just in terms of, the tool sets, Kubernetes, containers, microservices, the different assets that people now have really great access to in terms of services available in Azure
Yeah,
to drive that adoption. So that's really interesting, and we'll probably dive into that a little bit deeper along the way.
yeah, especially you touched on it with microservices, but then also serverless. And then you start to get into strategies, what I mentioned about cost optimization, and we're going to touch on more of those here in just a little bit.
Awesome. One of the big concerns is architecting for resiliency. I think there's a situation with cloud where you can have a variety of different deployment models, and some can be back to your serverless comment just a moment ago, or having diversity in terms of zones where you're deploying, how you're recovering, or having copies of data in different geo locations to ensure for high availability and data protection across your portfolio. Azure's engineered for this. So what are you recommending, Jason, in terms of best practices to protect data and to have high availability at the application level?
Yeah, good question. Understanding the workload it goes all back to that in your planning stages and understanding your business critical applications, your mission critical applications, and your advisory and or utility applications. And then those, of course, go along with servers and then understanding what you want for resiliency for each of those different verticals. So if you think about it, really, Azure in the cloud stops somewhere, and the cloud it's a data center, just like people are used to. So if you think about a device, a rack, a data center, a region, a zone, there's different strategies for all of those. And so I'm just going to kind of break it down here that there's different tools that you can use. I'm going to use a VM, just plain Jane VM as an example here. If it's just a single VM, you're going to get 3 nines. Now, 3 nines is not a lot. So if you want to protect it from a failure in the rack, they have what's called availability sets, and it starts to bump up your SLA. If you wanted to get it across data centers and protect your applications and your mission critical servers from a data center failure, you have what's called zones, availability zones. So what I just mentioned is availability with the sets, high availability with the zones, and then we start having a conversation of uptime. What is your RTO, RPO to your customers or to your business? And if those RTOs get near zero, which we have quite a few customers that say that, then we're looking into strategies for resiliency using disaster recovery strategies such as Azure Site Recovery across regions to give that geo separation of those data and the workloads.
So based on how you deploy, you can basically architect the desired RTO that your business requires for uptime and business continuity. So there's there's variability there, JP. Like you can, are you particularly sensitive, or can you manage a 15-minute failure and be okay? Those are conversations that you're having with our prospects and customers about the deployment models. Is that how it's working in the market?
Yes, absolutely. When we sit down for the ready stage, which you're going to see the framework coming up here in just a minute, you understand the digital estate. When you understand the digital estate, you then understand what the criticality is, either on the servers and or the workload. And then from there, we architect accordingly to meet the SLAs of that workload.
Awesome. Well, we're going to jump into a little bit of the security conversation. I'm going to lean on Bobby again. With your background in this particular field, it's funny. I remember early days. There was a huge amount of concern around public cloud adoption from a security perspective, and a lot of companies just felt like they had better security posture on-prem. They didn't believe in what the public cloud providers were doing in order to protect their infrastructure. There are even some early days of compromises that we heard that were, in the media. But we now know that they've raised their game. It's, rough and tough. They're spending tens of millions of dollars to protect their infrastructure every day. I want to get your perspective on, how you view the security posture of Azure and a public cloud, and how you talk about that in the context of, hey, putting, customers and prospects' mind at ease in terms of the investments that these companies have made.
Awesome subject. So I come back, from my very early experience in cybersecurity and just plain security. It used to be firewall and antivirus, right? The level of threats back then were fairly routine and regular. Today, we're dealing with a whole different class of potential vulnerabilities that are out there, right? So what winds up happening is a lot of companies go out and they start to look for cybersecurity products and services that they can add into their environment. Typically, that is a time-consuming process. It's going out and evaluating 4 or 5 different companies that provide the exact same cybersecurity tooling, and if they provide any management around that tooling, and then coming up ultimately with a decision, usually cost-driven, in order to be able to acquire that solution. With Azure, the beauty of it is that Azure over the next 5 years is going to spend about $20 billion protecting its Azure infrastructure. The beauty of it is that amount of spend continuously improves the types of security products and services that an Azure customer can consume. They have come out with a whole suite of Defender. It used to be called Defender for Cloud, and now it's also extended into M365 and O365. And the purpose behind that is to receive alerts on all of those different environments. Simple to manage. One tool runs very similarly over these types of applications. Add that if you want to go in and see everything on a single pane of glass, you can add in Sentinel. These types of prescriptive solutions, rather than having a variety of disparate solutions that have to interact with each other, make security so much simpler and more cost-effective for most of these clients that are coming onto Azure.
No, that's awesome. So it's not just the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure that's being protected that Azure's investing in, but it's at the application layer, M365, Defender, it's built in. Like they're building security into all the SaaS services or the applications that you're consuming in that public cloud.
That is correct. Right. And the key to that is, again, it's cost effective. It's easy to learn and easy to use, which is one of the most difficult parts about cybersecurity. And then the other component of it is being able to bring in all of that information into a single pane of glass where you can see what's going on.
Awesome.
gives the client a much better holistic view of what's happening with their environment from a security vulnerability perspective.
Awesome. So now that you're modernizing applications, you have secure infrastructure. Now, how are you driving innovation around the Azure and the public cloud? And we'll talk about the buzzword around AI and innovation and agility around AI. And I feel like there's a lot. Bobby, I'll probably lean on you again here, and Jason, you can jump in too. There's a journey here, and we've talked a little bit about it at the application level. Moving the application into the public cloud, getting your data protected. Now, how do we harness that data to drive insights into it to make sure that the competitive objectives that a lot of companies have around leveraging AI can be realized? And so around public cloud, we've got, I think, I kind of put this in two big categories. One is now we can consume services that provide insights within Azure, and that can be Power BI, even query services like Snowflake and others are starting to become services you can consume and read against the data set and do those queries. The second piece is for the advanced AI crowd, the ones who are really trying to build out large language models, to build the actual models themselves, to train those models, and to have the capacity, really limitless capacity in most instances, to consume the GPUs or the compute infrastructure to run those jobs. Bobby, I'll start with you. Like, how are you thinking about that in terms of, the conversation at the prospect and enterprise level around where are they in that journey? Like, do you have a staff of 50 data scientists writing algorithms, or are you just trying to get to the next level of visualization? How are those conversations going?
Yeah, great question. And I would say for most of the conversations that I have, it's really a crawl, walk, run type of situation, right? A lot of folks are in that category, one of those categories, and the majority of them, are looking how to be able to adopt AI within their infrastructure, within their data sets, in order to be able to innovate. And they're just starting out, so they don't have these huge teams that can just jump into it and start creating their own large language model for it. So what winds up happening is, if they adopt Azure, you wind up having the ability to deploy Azure AI. And one of the things that you can do with Azure AI is use existing templates on your own data, and then from there be able to take it to the next level where you start to modify those particular templates to customize them in order to meet your business goals. And then from there, you can decide that if you want to create something 100% custom and bespoke for your own organization, as you are building up your team, you have that ability as well. So Azure AI winds up giving you a tremendous amount of flexibility no matter where you're at in that journey, from just starting out to somebody that has quite a bit of experience in it.
Yeah, I think it's really an AI roadmap at the customer level. We have to really understand kind of where they are, what their current capabilities are. Jason, I know that you've been working on this in the background as well. What are some of the, what's your perspective as far as adoption of some of these tools and some of the training that you expect a lot of customers to try to achieve here?
Yeah, the thing is to make sure your data is out there first in a secure manner, right? And I mentioned about planning, so I'll go back to planning and I'll go into it more here in just a minute. But once you have your data out there, it's identifying your data sets that you could glean information out of, and taking that data and putting it into a single tool. And that's what Azure gives you with Fabric. It gives you a single tool to ingest the data that you want to ingest. It gives you a single tool to run analytics with Synapse Analytics. Synapse Analytics is the name of the tool. And it gives you the ability to take that data, to model it, to experiment with it, to do different analysis on it, And then if you want to port that into other maybe productivity applications, Copilot is a part of this fabric now that you're able to do that with. So it can take and it can bring intelligence from your data sets into an Excel spreadsheet to drive different things. It can take data from your experiments into Power BI so you can get some business intelligence from it. Why I'm saying this is it's the only place I know that gives you one package, one pane of glass to ingest your data and get business intelligence out of it. That's what we're seeing. That's the conversations we're getting in with having the data out there and being able to do something with it in a single screen, making it easy to model an experiment.
Can I make one additional point regarding the data? A lot of people are fearful about AI and how their data can potentially be used by people outside of their organization. And the one key thing about any of the Azure AI or Microsoft Copilot products is that the data that it is using is your data and it's exclusive to you and not shared. So the security around data is very tight for Azure AI as well as Copilot. One thing that's interesting is that you can also import external data into your data set in order to be able to expand the capabilities of these particular AI products. But remember that the data that you use to develop this and the data, you don't have to expand it to the public data. The data is your data and it's strictly within your organization.
Good point.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know that there's a lot of concern from the medium and enterprise level around the data segmentation, isolation, and not other clients or even the cloud provider not being able to access the data. So that's a great point. And I think as I sit here and reflect, I think the interesting thing is from an innovation perspective and an AI perspective, Azure's really in a spot where they can meet you anywhere you are in that journey. So usability on M365 and Copilot just to drive, productivity and insights into your day-to-day job through to visualization, Power BI, SQL queries, kind of mid-low level data insight jobs that you're trying to do, all the way to some of the more advanced capabilities that Azure has. I think it's really interesting that Azure has developed all those capabilities, and they're just getting started. We are watching the roadmap around integration into the M365 suite with the back end intelligence of a lot of the different services they're running in Azure, and there's going to be a lot more really interesting things to come in the next 6 to 18 months. But with that, let's go ahead, JP. Go ahead, Jason.
Say one interesting that we've had over the last 4 slides is that you heard us mention a single pane of glass. From management to protection to understanding your data and what you can do with it, these are just separate single panes of glass, meaning you don't have to have 20 data scientists. If you can find one or afford one, you don't have to have them on staff to really get in there and use the tool and do it effectively. That's a key here.
100%. Yeah, and you're right. Those resources are expensive, and you have to be fairly mature if you're going to be hiring those types of people in the business.
That's right.
Jason, I know you're a great storyteller. I want to move you into the next phase of this presentation, which is, we've had some great successes so far to date, with companies like Whole Earth Brands. Tell us a little bit about that journey and what business problem they were trying to solve, how OTAVA fit in and helped them and got them on board.
Well, with SAP, it's never easy. It's never an easy migration. So that was the first challenge. Now, in all seriousness, they had aging hardware on site, and they wanted to take advantage of the abilities in the cloud. And Azure has been they started to develop a cloud first strategy over the last few years, and had some small workloads out there and really wanted to take the rest of their workloads out to Azure. So the Azure was the easy choice. They had some familiarity to it, so it was a snap fit for us. So the first thing that was driving this was aging hardware, but then the agility. Wanted agility to be able to, through acquisition or organic growth, to be able to scale and scale with the business because their business is scaling, and they've had some challenges doing that under a capex model, bringing equipment in, and as you know, a lot of equipment that people, when you order it, you get all this equipment you really don't need, but you're paying for. Uh, so taking advantage of a cost strategy as well in public cloud was very important to them. So they came to us, and we started out with what I've been saying all along, and what you're going to see in the next slide is using a framework to really understand their problems, their data, their workload, understanding how we can drive the outcomes. And those outcomes, as you can see here, some of the benefits that we'll talk about in just a minute are down there at the bottom. The solution really is more of an IaaS solution, and then relying on SAP, of course, overlaying on that IaaS solution. But what we're able to do is bring ease of management, where you have visibility to their entire platform through the Azure portal, uh, developing workbooks so they can see what's going on with performance, and get notified and alerts right away through native monitoring. Protection with Defender for Cloud, as Bobby mentioned a bit ago, there's different varieties of Defender, but when you say Defender for Cloud, it's a very broad statement, and you don't realize that it brings everything to a single pane of glass where you can have management over your VMs, your data sets, your databases, um, your identity provider, which typically is Entra ID in the case of Azure. But you have all of that in one panel, which was very important to them because they're a very security minded company. So having that capabilities, and then with the monitoring, the native monitoring and management that we set up for them. So if anything is triggered, we get notifications about it. We get notifications as well as the admins at Polar Brands get notifications. So it was the time to value, and bringing that visibility and notification was very important to them. And then on top of that, resiliency. Resiliency using, we mentioned Azure Site Recovery earlier, of having that low RPO and RTO for their systems so they can remain online and serve their customers through their business. So it's very important. And what we're able to do by following the framework that I've been mentioning is that we made it modular. So very scalable. In fact, there was two other workloads that we were going to bolt on after we built this, and they were snap and fit. So when I say other workloads, I'm not talking, okay, they had a couple of servers in this closet, that closet. I'm talking about their EU presence. So taking into consideration the compliancy standards with GDPR, with it PCI, and then another workload that they had in another data center we're able to bring in and snap into this. So once you're going to start to see, by using the framework, we can build this modularity to it and really deliver time to value for our customers.
Yeah, Jason, you bring up a great point, and I think even though we have a lot of hybrid deployments, most companies are still in a what I call a bimodal, environment where they have kind of legacy deployments on prem. They have cloud native stuff in the cloud. They haven't done a ton of migration. So talk about the methodology, this framework, and how you navigate that process for customers, because it's a big deal, and a lot of customers have tried and failed at workload migration into public cloud.
Absolutely. We hear those stories all the time, and so it happens, right? Sometimes we call it rogue IT, but it happens. So we get questions about, hey, we got this workload out there, and it's cost us an arm and a leg. We're not sure if we're doing it right. We don't know if security is there. It's because we didn't follow a plan. And so we have assessments and a review framework service that we can help them out with. But for a net new customer that's new, that's doing cloud adoption with a public cloud, in this case Azure, this is the framework we follow. Now, this is not intellectual property from us. This is Microsoft's framework, and so it's to ensure success and the ITIs, as I call them, the agility, the scalability of cloud. It enables that. It enables the IT department to grow with the business if you follow a strategy. So I'm just going to walk through each of these parts of the strategy. Then I'm going to actually ask Bobby to comment on what he's seen in the field. But we start with I mentioned this earlier, understanding the workload, understand the motivations, understand the outcomes, understand the success criteria of the project. And that's what we do in define the strategy phase. And once we collect all that information, then you start to go in the planning phase of really understanding the digital estate, understanding the workloads, understanding the criticality of those workloads. We talked about RTO, RPOs a little bit ago with mission critical, business critical applications and how you design an architect for that resiliency for those. That comes with a good plan. That plan in itself, you spend the most time on, because if you get that right, you're going to be successful. And your time to value is going to be achieved successfully for the customer. Now, you can see that it has a skills readiness plan. So there's more than just a plan here. It's, are you able to handle this out there? Because a lot of people have a skills gap. And that's where a company like OTAVA can step in and help with that, because we offer managed services. And then a cloud adoption plan. So it's all about understanding the outcomes that are desired and then architecting. And that's where I'm going to lead into the next ready phase is, are you ready? Are we ready? Are the systems ready? Do we understand what we're doing here and what the desired outcomes are? Yes, 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 yes. Then we start to put together a implementation strategy. As you can see, then that leads into migration and modernize and innovate. Now, which typically in migration, I mentioned a simple tool to use is Azure Migrate. There's other tools out there, of course. We've had much success with Azure Migrate. And then you get into conversations too about modernization. Okay, should we re-platform one of your workloads because it makes more sense to take advantage of resiliency? Maybe it's a PaaS offering or something in Azure that you can take advantage of, to where you can spin up the service and or turn it down when you don't need it for cost saving strategies. And then talk about innovation here, because innovation is, what do you want to do with that data once you get it out there? We've had those conversations now with AI, with Fabric offerings, and taking advantage of those. You can't have any adoption without talking about security and talking about the options with security. And now you're going to see in the bottom three, these are really iterative processes. And what that means is that you want to make sure you come back and revisit it. You have we talked about the single screen for Defender, getting in there, understanding your risks. If it's about compliances, there's a compliance advisor as well that you can go in there, and it gives you an evaluation of where you're at risk at and what you need to address. So it lays it all out there in front of you. So very insightful, but it's part of a growth strategy and an iterative process to make sure you view what's going on, to make sure you're within scope of your compliances and or your security practice and programs. And then manage it and define the strategy. And really that define the strategy, when you start to see about these maturity models, you're talking about the iterative process. And we talk about governance, you start to get into data modeling strategies, understanding your data better, and then what you can do with your data. So this whole plan, this takes a while. You're not going to get this done in one conversation. So typically it's about 3 conversations. We call them workshops that we do, where we have a whole list of check boxes that we go through each one of these to understand and make sure these deployments are successful, just like we did with Whole Earth Brands.
Yeah, Bobby, I want to get your perspective here as well, because this is the framework and the methodology. But in that conversation, I'll move to the next slide. How do you stratify the different workloads? How do we okay, I got to deal with SQL or Windows servers. I got some VMware workloads. I've got some databases, some Linux, open source stuff around in the environment. How do you decompose or stratify those different workloads and start to prioritize for what makes sense to migrate?
Great question. And we've been talking about a framework, and we haven't really given it a name, but Microsoft has a name for it, and it's called the Well-Architected Framework. So Azure's Well-Architected Framework is really a step-by-step series of questions and documentation that you go through in order to be able to determine not only whether Azure is the right solution for that particular workload, but really what workloads would work best and be optimized if you brought them into Azure. And that's what we've really been talking about, right? Not every single workload is ideal for a particular hyperscaler cloud. Different hyperscalers have different affinities to certain types of workloads, and they usually revolve around cost optimization. How much is it to run particular workloads, or in addition to that, to store data, that sort of thing. So you have to look at it in a holistic way. But the key is that Azure tends to be the most flexible from my experience of the different cloud providers out there, and their well-architected framework and being able to participate in workshops. We can bring the experience that we have within our customer base as to what makes a great workload for an Azure environment and what really doesn't make sense unless you go in and refactor or recreate that particular workload application and restructure the data. So I think if we follow the plan that we've been talking about, the framework, and using it, according to what the outcomes are that we're looking to get, from the customer gives us those outcomes. These are the 3 things that we want to be able to accomplish, or the 20 things that we want to be able to accomplish. If we follow that framework, we should be able to identify with a great deal of certainty, what makes a good solution for them from the Azure perspective.
Awesome. Yeah, so I think we've talked about the methodologies, kind of the best practices, the tool sets that they have. As we roll into a discussion around strategy, right? There's a lot of things that Azure in particular is enabling for clients, whether that's modernizing the app, replatforming, leveraging some of the things we talked about with Kubernetes and others, automating, leveling up in terms of DevOps and the automation in your business, all the things we talked about around AI, customer insights, customer journey, and finally, how to run these things across different domains. So we can actually get services that can interact with edge computing or on-premise deployments of different services and licensing that we have deployed. Jason, how are you looking at these strategies and starting to talk to clients about Azure? And is it all at once, or do you prioritize these things and start to talk about adoption and where it makes sense for a particular enterprise organization?
Yeah, good question. So in the ready phase of the adoption framework we're talking about, that's where these conversations come out, and it's in there about modernizing. You could do this once you understand the workload. You have options. What's most important? Performance, cost, unlimited budget. Yeah, I'm joking, right? No one has unlimited budget. However, we did touch about microservices earlier, and you see right here. So when you're talking about compute, can we modernize your compute workload? Can we segment that out or decouple that a little bit and start talking about modularizing your workloads with Kubernetes? And what Azure does is they offer AKS or Kubernetes service, but they also have their own flavor for the smaller workloads. So if you don't need all that orchestration that comes with Kubernetes, they have their own called ACI. So that's an economical version. So it depends on what they're looking to do when we modernize, but compute is where we start. And then you start looking at adding intelligence and or automation for other things, and you might start talking about serverless. And we haven't talked a lot about logic apps in Azure, but putting really decoupling workloads. Let's see, things, tasks you want to perform on those workloads into logic apps. That's how I wanted to say it. Now, I don't see it on this particular screen right here, but it goes in kind of you go from microservices to serverless to automate. And another thing we really didn't touch on is with serverless, you only pay for the compute you use to process that workload. That's where the savings really come in. So having those conversations about modernizing during the planning process is sets the pathway, and it's never a big bang, Brian. It's let's move
Right.
the work out there. Let's understand how we can maybe refactor or replatform some of our workloads. And then once we get that down and we have a good visual of everything that's going on, we're going to start talking about modernizing and or taking advantage of microservices and our serverless to really take advantage of what all the cloud has to offer.
So it almost sounds like you start at the business stakeholder level and you figure out what their primary objectives, their goals are, what their big applications are, and then you walk them through, okay, how are we leveraging these things to modernize and to future proof the things that you're doing in your business. And it almost drives from the stakeholder down into the IT organization from that implementation perspective. Is that how how these conversations are going? It's no longer just IT making all the decisions. They're actually collaborating with the different, business stakeholders in the organization.
Absolutely. In the planning stage that we just went through, there actually is a bullet in there to pulling in the right stakeholders because it really is a business conversation. And that's what Azure opens up for us is it's allow our companies and our customers to actually look at this in how far do we want to go here. Not what we can do, but how far do we want to go and how do we plan for it. So it really is an adoption strategy that it's segmented, which is just like we've been talking about, but they take it on in small chunks. And what we're finding though is that once you get the workloads out there, the ease of management, the visibility, the advancement in technology, and I tell you one that's been really hot lately is really understanding that you can only pay for what you want to use, and I mean that by what you want to use. That you can turn down these services, you can automate that, you can orchestrate that, and that's where a lot of the cost savings come into play. Where you can't do that with the big irons hardware that you may have in your data center. So we're seeing having a lot of those conversations, and then once we get to that point, then we start cracking that egg on intelligence. How can we drive business intelligence from your data? And you're absolutely right. That conversation is not just an IT conversation. That spans multiple business units from all of our customers and companies to really understand how can you use this data? How can you use this data? And those conversations are with business units and all the way to the C-suite, not just the IT department anymore.
Awesome. And then Bobby, back, we've touched on security a couple times here, around Defender and Sentinel and things like that, and the overarching infrastructure protection. But from a multi-layered security perspective, how do you stack these up? How do you talk to customers about what I'll just call an end-to-end security posture that protects everything that they're worried about, and it's not really a point solution, approach that we're taking in security on the Azure platform.
Right. The key is protecting everything, right? And people are adopting a couple of different frameworks. One is the whole notion of zero trust, and other folks are taking certain certifications and certain compliance requirements and developing their security around those, right? They take the principles for those and then they start coming up with a cybersecurity maturity model, if you will, for modernizing their current state of cybersecurity. The beauty of it is that within the tool set that Azure has for their infrastructure, it will also give you guidance for the types of security that you have to have in order to be able to meet those compliances. And you don't necessarily have to go outside of the Azure environment in order to be able to be compliant with those requirements. They have the tools and the products that you can consume within your environment in order to be able to meet those compliances. It doesn't mean that if you have standardized on a third-party solution for your own internal data center or your own private cloud environment that you can't use that same tool in your Azure environment. Just know that there's probably a tool that's available that most likely will perform better and integrate with everything else more seamlessly than bringing in a third-party tool. To me, I think simplicity and cost are the two big factors in making sure that cybersecurity is handled well. The more complex cybersecurity is, the less likely that people are going to know what to do with the information that's coming from those tools and how to remediate any of those alerts in order to be secure from potential vulnerabilities there. And the cost portion of it, I used to tell clients, look, if you want Fort Knox, have 10 times the gold that's in Fort Knox. Okay, it's going to cost you a lot of money. Going to Azure, these tools, as we see on the slide, have been developed by Microsoft based off of their spend for their infrastructure, and they're going in and deploying, giving you the ability to deploy the same kind of tools that they use for their infrastructure for your environment. The beauty of that is that if it's good enough for Microsoft to be able to use in their environments for their data centers and that sort of stuff, it's more than good enough for the average customer that's coming in, and even some of the very strict compliance requirements that are out there that some of our customers are placed under. So to me, it's a really good solution. The conversations, instead of having to present 160 different types of products and services that I'm used to, having to talk about, I could talk about a set of tools that are all cloud native within Azure that you can see on one single pane of glass. And it simplifies the conversation and gives customers a sense of being able to control what's uncontrolled in their current cybersecurity.
Yeah, we've come a long ways. And so I think it's really interesting to see how far we've come in this journey. And Jason's got another very insightful statement to make here. So go for it, buddy.
Yeah, just something on that. Bobby covered it very well, but we talked earlier, 20 billion in the next, what, Bobby, 3 years, 5 years?
5 years, yeah, 5 billion a year.
That they're going to spend on here. So proactively spending, that's what this company is doing to protect their assets, their data, their offering, their services. And when you look at this, and what really, and it took me a minute when I was looking at this to really understand it, but 65 trillion global signals daily.
Yeah.
And how do they do that? And you start to think, okay, all the installations of the productivity software that's out there, right? Of course, their Azure Cloud, their servers, right? The email. Think about where all these signals are coming from. It's a very comprehensive threat intelligent protection system. And it took me a minute to really understand how to get that number of 65 trillion. So I started thinking about all the tax services that they have and gathering all that data out. And then one thing we didn't have on the slide here was Sentinel, and it's relatively new, but Copilot for security. So it starts to take do you need a SOC now? Maybe not. With Copilot for security, that's running actively across the data that's coming into Sentinel, it can give you intelligent insights and notification about what's happening and what you need to do. So I just wanted to bring that up because that's one thing we didn't have on this slide.
And furthermore, Copilot for Security also gives you remediation action steps. Okay,
Right.
so it guides your team on exactly how to remediate a particular vulnerability that's been detected, or an alert that's been detected, and how to remediate that. One extra point, and I know we've talked about security quite a bit, but the thing that I wanted to draw out is Microsoft is spending $20 billion over 5 years just on security. Think about how much money they're spending on all of these other tools that we've been talking about. In particular, the investment that they're making into AI. If they're spending $20 billion on security, I guarantee AI, since it's the thing that's going to drive this industry forward for the next 10 to 15 years, it's going to be way more than that.
Yeah, they're definitely making the investments. We could spend another hour talking about, where they're going with OpenAI and the broader AI roadmap that they have. But this is just the beginning, guys. So I really appreciate your participation, giving us your insights today. It's just the start of the series. So just to remind everyone, this is the kickoff series. It's on demand. It'll be available on our website and on YouTube. And then we're going to have 3 subsequent webinars focused on data compliance and governance, focused on data visualization and data management, and then finally the deep dive into AI and what can we do with the off-the-shelf consumable services, and then how can we level up in terms of letting customers get to that point where they're building out their own goals and their own insights around algorithms and model training. So those are coming. Stay tuned, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for your time.